Huddle Up Podcast is sponsored by Arena Eats. Log on to the website arenaeats.app, that's arenaeats.app, for the ultimate fan experience. At your favorite sports venue, Arena Eats mobile app, pre-order, express pickup, and in-seat delivery. How do you place your order? Guys, kicking off the show tonight, the latest round of the college football playoff rankings came out. We'll talk about some of the issues with the Big Ten. It obviously will have some impact as we discuss the rankings tonight and where Ohio State fell and the situation with them and whatnot. But as we look down the top 10, I'll run it down here. Alabama remains at number 1, Notre Dame 2, Clemson 3, Ohio State 4, A&M 5, Florida 6. I think that all stayed the same. Cincinnati still 7. Georgia, Iowa State, and Miami round out your top 10 in the college football playoff. Earlier today, it was announced that Clemson and Notre Dame's final game next weekend have both been postponed or canceled, not even postponed. So they will close out their seasons this week. Notre Dame already has a guaranteed spot in the ACC championship game coming up later on this month. So as we look at this college football top 10, obviously the top 25, but at this point, anybody outside the top 10, I think is in terms of a potential playoff spot, I think is pretty much written out. So just kind of looking at the top 5 itself, or in top 10, for me, I'm looking at this and barring some sort of unforeseen situation where Clemson and or Notre Dame loses this week, both those teams go to the ACC title game. I think personally, we'll start at Notre Dame. I think barring some sort of huge unforeseen situation this weekend against Syracuse, or a absolute throttling at the hands of Clemson, which I don't think is going to happen this year. I know they have Trevor Lawrence back. We saw them play earlier this season. I don't see at this point Notre Dame not making it to the college football playoff. Alabama's probably in that discussion as well. We'll go to you first, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point with the with the win at Clemson and the other games are on the schedule, you had enough. They're not the usual Notre Dame quality wins, but that win at North Carolina was a pretty handed win. You get down there, you find yourself in kind of a pressure cooker in the first half, and then you come out and just realize, let's just play our game, and they found themselves winning fairly easily by the end. So I think escaping that, there's really not a lot. You look at the other teams around, and if Notre Dame comes out with one loss, and that loss is to Clemson, who, we've seen the college playoff committee before with teams like Ohio State. You're kind of seeing it now with them sitting at 4. The teams that are these proverbial powerhouses, especially with Alabama, seem to always kind of have a position there. And I think Clemson's become one of those teams. So if your only loss is to one of those kind of Mount Rushmore teams, I don't see any reason, even if it's by, a touchdown or 2, maybe even 3, as long as it looked good and you didn't look completely unprepared for Trevor Lawrence, I don't see any reason or any scenario where one of those teams on the outside were to catch the Irish.
Nick, how about you?
I do agree with the both of you. The only thing that I would be worried about if I were a fan of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish is a complete and utter throttling with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. It would kind of diminish the win that they had earlier in the season, knowing that Trevor Lawrence did not play that game.
Right.
Now, there is precedence in this happening. I mean, look at the Ohio State-Wisconsin game from a few years ago where Ohio State won like 61-7 or something like that, and Wisconsin pretty much was like, "Nice knowing you. Have a good day. You just lost your spot in the playoff." And you could also say the same thing if that were to happen in Notre Dame. If they come out and if they get completely wiped by Trevor Lawrence and Clemson, say, throwing this out there, it's just a score like 45-10 or something like that, what will the College Football Playoff Committee think of that first game against Clemson? I mean, it will hold a lot of weight. Now, if Notre Dame plays really good, they only lose by 4 points, they stay with Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, it doesn't hurt them in the least. They deserve a top fourth position. The problem that we are running into, though, gentlemen, is we have no idea who's even going to be eligible to be in a top four.
Yeah, that's the hard thing, and looking at the rankings as they came out tonight, I'm still a little, I still feel a little uneasy, and I understand that this is a week to week ranking. We've seen it over the last couple of years, so it doesn't matter where you are in the first one, second one, fifth one. It's where you matter and where you end up in the final one. So Ohio State being there, and I know on ESPN they were trying to make a lot out of the fact that the committee did put Ohio State at number 4, even though they've only played 4 games. To me, Ohio State, and this is where we'll kind of include the issues with the Big Ten, because we've already seen Wisconsin, they're ineligible for the Big Ten title game. If Ohio State doesn't play either this weekend against Michigan State and or next weekend against Michigan, they are ineligible for the Big Ten title game. And for me, I know they were trying to make a case, and I get it's TV show, it's ratings, it's all of that. To me, Ohio State needs to play at least one of these, they need to play these final 2 games, and they need to play and win that Big Ten title game. I don't think an Ohio State team that's 4-0 or 5-0 that doesn't play in the Big Ten title game will be or should be eligible for the Big Ten title game or for the college football playoff. That said, do I think Ohio State is one of the 4 best teams in the country? I do. I'm not going to sit here and say that they're not. However, how are you going to justify putting a 4-0 or 5-0 team whose best win is against Indiana? And Indiana is a good football team, sitting currently at number 12. But that's a game you only won by a touchdown. So how are you going to justify putting that team over a 8-1 Texas A&M who's only lost to Alabama? A Cincinnati team who's probably going to be undefeated. I have a hard time. Hell, even a Georgia team who might have 2 losses, but those 2 losses would be to Texas A&M and Alabama. I just have a hard time. And Nick, we'll go to you first this time. I have a hard time seeing Ohio State. Whether or not they actually do get put in, to me, they should not be in the college football playoff this year with only 4 or 5 games.
It is a very dicey situation that the Big Ten is in right now. It's also a very dicey situation for the College Football Playoff Committee. We do know that Ohio State did not play last week due to the fact of COVID. Mm-hmm. And there is a very good chance that they might not be able to play this weekend.
Right.
We don't know yet. We will probably know by either Thursday or Friday what that situation is. If they don't play this weekend, they would have to play the rest of the games to be somewhat eligible for the college football playoff. I agree with you, Jim. They are one of the best 4 teams in the country, bar none. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The thing is, if you don't have the games played, you will be deemed ineligible. We already saw that happen with Wisconsin. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, coming out of the West is either going to be Northwestern or Iowa.
Correct.
So you already know it's going to be one of those teams coming out of the West. For the East, it could be Ohio State, but if not, it's going to be Indiana. Now, with all due respect, Northwestern versus Indiana in the Big Ten championship game is something that not many people would really be looking forward to, especially Fox. And let's face it, Kevin Warren will probably be banging his head against the wall 100 times over. But something weird happened yesterday and today that really puts everything into perspective of what we're looking at here. Pat Forty on Sports Illustrated's 40-yard dash in his third down made mention of Ohio State possibly being ineligible. And he said that the team that actually holds all the cards right now, shockingly, is Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because they just came out with a couple positive tests for their team. Now, right now, it seems like they're still going to play. But there is the distinct possibility that if it morphs into, something worse, they may not be able to play this weekend or next weekend. And
Right.
What's next weekend?
The game.
The big game. In a way, Jim Harbaugh can say, go scratch to Ryan Day, and Ohio State will be left out holding the hand. Now, Kirk Herbstreit, me and Jim mentioned this earlier in his in our talk prior to the show, went on the College Football Playoff show and said, and lambasted Michigan, saying that they could actually do that. Now, of course, he started walking it back because like hundreds and hundreds of people were probably tweeting at him are you nuts? Are you insane? You're an idiot, and all that good stuff. That's the clean version of what probably happened on Twitter. But this is the conundrum the Big Ten finds itself in. What is Kevin Warren going to do? Now, something that was said years ago by the predecessor to Kevin Warren, Jim Delaney. If you don't win your conference championship, if you're not the conference champion, you do not deserve to play in the college football playoff. If Ohio State is ineligible, what happens? It's kind of obvious that the Big Ten this year will not have someone in the college football playoff if Ohio State is deemed ineligible.
Yeah.
Now, you're talking your marquee school in sports right now, in football, I should say. To leave them out would be catastrophic for the Big Ten.
Well, I mean, the Big Ten, the Big Ten has faced a lot of criticism throughout this entire COVID process because of the delays to start and, the no off weeks and everything. So they gave themselves a tight window that they had to work within anyway. And obviously, we've seen with Wisconsin already, potentially Ohio State, that they are having these these major issues as we're coming up on the end of the season. With. I don't necessarily agree with the notion that if you don't win a conference championship that you shouldn't be eligible because I mean, quite frankly, part of the reason that the college football playoff, and Sean, we'll get to you here with this Big Ten issue, but part of the reason that the college football playoff was created was to kind of eliminate the automatic bids and all of that nonsense that the BCS created. So you're ideally getting the four best teams. However, as we've seen across the board and has been said across the board, this year has presented the most ridiculous set of challenges and whatnot that we've ever seen. And so, if Clemson wins the ACC title game, and it's close, we've already kind of said, Notre Dame's probably still going to be in the playoff. They're not going to be an ACC champion, but they passed the eye test. To me, it's more the number of games for Ohio State. Sean?
I think we talked early in the season, the Big Ten, as far as this situation they find themselves in, has kind of done it to themselves by not declaring as early as other conferences and saying, well, we're not going to play. And then be like, whoa, wait a minute. We kind of would like some game checks. Let's get in there and put together this kind of measly, handful of game season by not joining the party right away and waiting a few weeks to kind of change your mind and back your way into the season and finding a way to make it work and become eligible for a college football playoff and already having to fight through that nightmare this was already kind of in play. Like you kind of knew this was a potential thing. With any type of outbreak like this, having less games is already going to set you up for the possibility of failure, even if you were in the conference championship game. Like even if that rule wasn't in play and it was just, hey, we played 6-7 games, you guys played 10, we still think we're better, and it's up to a group of people to decide, if you'd have played 4 more, would anyone have gotten tired? Like, could have someone gotten hurt? Like there's all these kind of intangibles in the college game. Not to mention, college football in general. You can tell me like, well, we know Ohio State's the best, and we know they're in the top 4, and this and that. Unfortunately, I mean, college football is the one place where your resume comes into question every year. It's the reason teams try to blow other teams out to prove they're better than the other teams that played them. It's the reason why teams have, stopped scheduling as many patsies in their out-of-conference games, because all of a sudden, to get into this playoff, you have, 4 teams have a shot instead of 2. But, with the way it shakes up, there's more teams, kind of fighting for 4 than would have normally. When it was back to just 2 teams back in the day, there's a lot of years there's a big fall off from like 2 to 3, bigger than there is from like 4 to 5. So you really need to pack your resume full. And when you're already setting yourself up with less games, it's very hard to do that. I think A&M holds a very interesting card, playing a ranked Auburn team this week. They get a chance to maybe jump in and force some teams to win a championship game to get them back out. I don't really know how that fully shakes up, but yeah, if you ask me, if the 2 games aren't played and whether Michigan's gonna kind of hardball them and do what they want to do, or whether COVID just strikes again, I don't necessarily. Do I feel sorry for the players at Ohio State, those kids that are out there, kind of trying their best to get there? Sure, who wouldn't feel bad for those kids? But do I feel bad for the Big Ten itself? Not really. I feel like when you made that kind of mistake early, and when you're kind of backtracking to sneak into a season and try to get a share of the pie, and then you don't get represented because you can't put together a good championship game, I don't feel bad for you. Now, I did have a question as far as the so Ohio State say they don't play this week or next, ineligible. I know the Big Ten planned on slating a full slate of games that week alongside their championship game. Would the teams still play one of those non-championship games, or would they be ineligible for anything that week?
I haven't seen anything, but I would assume that they would probably try to schedule something. And if I'm the Big Ten,
I'm scheduling Wisconsin and Ohio State.
Exactly. I was just about to say that, because that's your best chance to backdoor Ohio State into the
give them a better opponent than they would have gotten. And maybe that's
the funny thing that nobody has actually talked about, Sean. That is a fantastic point.
I thought about it going into this week is if Ohio State doesn't get in by a technicality, couldn't they still play the other team that didn't get in because of a technicality?
Right, because all the teams are playing on championship weekend to give them an extra game.
Because I'll tell you what, if it was, and I was scheduling TV that week, I'll tell you what, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think they'll be able to do it, but when you declare when your team is declared ineligible from participating in the college football championship game,
I would think
the Big Ten will try to schedule something so the kids can play a game, but I would not be surprised if both Wisconsin and Ohio State say thanks, but no thanks, because they're seniors that are going to start getting ready for the NFL draft. It's really a game in which you have nothing to play for. They may not even – here's another thing that people have to think about. These 2 teams, if they're not eligible to play in a college football playoff game, do they say yes to an invitation to a New Year's bowl game or any other bowl game you're contracted to for the Big Ten? There's what do you call it? It's like I don't want to say butterfly effect, but there's like a domino effect, I should say. There you go. A domino effect on this of what could possibly happen, because we've seen a lot of college football players this year opt out from playing this season because they wanted to be safe rather than be sorry.
Sure.
Especially players on teams that are eligible, like highly ranked teams eligible to play for, in the playoffs. We've seen it with LSU. We've seen it with a couple of the Big 12 schools. A lot of players are like, I don't want to get hurt in a truncated season. I'm going to sit it out, and I will take whatever I have and go play and attempt, to work on my draft stock for next year without playing college football this year.
Sure.
If you're ineligible, Ohio State, Wisconsin, any other team that's deemed ineligible, I could see players saying no, they're going to opt out, and just say no. I can see possibly the schools saying, I do not accept your invitation to play in a contracted bowl game for the sheer fact that COVID. And
yeah, I don't know that we're going to see a lot of schools opt out of bowl games. Some will. I mean, some bowl games we've already seen. I know the Pinstripe Bowl and the Sun Bowl have already been postponed just because of the COVID issue. But I mean, those are smaller level bowl games, lesser tier games. But I think to Sean's point, and this, and this is something that we can look in and kind of monitor on our social media is like, if you're Ohio State and you can't play one of these final two games, if I'm the Big Ten, if I'm Ohio State, and if they are eligible to play that championship weekend, not in the Big Ten championship game because they're ineligible for that, but every team in the Big Ten is playing that weekend a game just kind of thrown together.
They're doing like cross.
Yeah,
I think they're doing a lot of cross playing.
Yeah, just to get guys an extra game
in
because they had a shorter schedule than everybody else. If I'm Ohio State, I'm saying get me Wisconsin. If I'm the Big Ten, I'm saying make that game happen because that is possibly your opportunity. Because and this is where we'll close up the so we'll kind of look at that and possibly touch back on it next week, Sean. And we'll look at that. Huddle Up Podcast is sponsored by Arena Eats. Log on to the website arenaeats.app. That's arenaeats.app for the ultimate fan experience. At your favorite sports venue, Arena Eats mobile app, pre-order, express pickup, and in-seat delivery. How do you place your order? But here's the thing. So let's hypothesize that Ohio State becomes ineligible, whether it's this week versus Michigan State, next week versus Michigan. One of those two games doesn't happen. They're not eligible for the Big Ten title game. Theoretically, they are out. Now, let's assume Alabama wins out. Clemson beats Notre Dame by less than 10. So let's assume that Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame all make it into the college football playoff. So now looking at the rest of the top 10, you have Texas A&M, Florida at that point probably eliminated because they lost to Alabama in the SEC title game.
And A&M.
And A&M. So that would give Florida 2 losses. So then you have Cincinnati. Let's hypothesize they finish out the year. They go undefeated, win the AAC. Then you still have Georgia, Iowa State probably gonna win the Big 12. Miami's out of there. Oklahoma, Indiana. They're going to be probably playing in the Big Ten title game against Northwestern or Iowa. So really, you're kind of looking at Texas A&M, Cincinnati. Let's say Iowa State wins the Big 12, Indiana wins the Big 10. So Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson get in. Who's your fourth team? Is it Texas A&M? Is it Cincinnati? Is it Iowa State? Or is it Indiana? To me, I think this is the best case scenario for that Cinderella, maybe, the AAC, the no name. This is the spot that UCF wished they were in a couple years ago. I think this is the year you put in Cincinnati because they're going to go undefeated. Now, like, I hate slighting Texas A&M because their only losses to Alabama, but I think if you have 2 ACC and 2 SEC teams, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to tune that out just because of their perceived bias or what have you. So I'm going to actually say Cincinnati gets into that fourth spot. Sean, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think that's a sloppy bunch of teams, and you have a couple more you could maybe make a case for. I mean, it's real hard when you're looking at 2-loss teams, but, much like we were trying to make the argument of 1-loss team over, maybe a weak or undefeated team, something like that. If it comes down to a 2-loss team over a 1, that college football committee is going to try to find the best team available. But in that case, it doesn't sound like there's going to be a clear-cut best team. I mean, Georgia probably is, but they're in the end discussion probably isn't going to be
right
there.
because they lost twice.
So I do like the idea of putting the smaller school in and just kind of letting it play out, just because the larger schools kind of don't have that resume coming in. The one school that I think has a shot yet, other than those, and may find them wasting it, and I think should be in the discussion, is BYU. BYU is there, and they have throttled teams. Now, have they played a tremendous schedule? No, but in the grand scheme of things, has Cincinnati either. BYU's flashy. The quarterback's a pretty big commodity as far as NFL scouts are looking at. They seem to really love this kid, and it's not a hapless schedule. I mean, Boise State is Boise State, but it's not like they're squeaking by anybody. I mean, their points for, points against is one of the most impressive things I've seen in a while. I don't care who you play, but I think that's a team that might sneak in too. I mean, it may take a Cincinnati stumble for that to happen,
Sure.
but yeah, I mean, it's a D1 program. It's probably going to be an undefeated program, and they're probably going to have outscored pretty much everyone else in the NCAA. So that shows some excitement. I would still like them over anyone from the Big 12. I don't think Iowa State. I think Oklahoma was pretty much their only chance. Oklahoma State may have been their last chance. I don't like Iowa State getting enough votes to get there. I would say one of those two teams.
All right, Nick, how about you?
Looking at the standings, as the rankings as it is right now, if Cincinnati wins out and wins the AAC championship game, if Ohio State is deemed ineligible,
Right, and that's our scenario.
And that's the play, yeah.
That's the play. What do you call it? Then Cincinnati has to get in there at number 4, because if you look at Texas A&M, they may not play in their in the conference championship. Florida, they'll play Alabama, and if they lose, that's 2 losses, they're out.
Right.
So, and then the next team after that is Cincinnati. You can't leapfrog Georgia. They're not going to be play. They might not. Obviously, they may not. They might not even play in the championship game. Iowa State, you guys said it well. Good team. Can't see them leapfrogging. Miami, no. Oklahoma, no. Indiana, no. BYU would be a dark horse. The problem is, I think they're ranked too far down to make it.
Yeah, and it's that resume. I mean, it's that resume.
Yeah, based on where they got ranked tonight, in the other polls they were like 7 or 8, and they're all the way down at 13 in this one. To me, that tells you what the College Football Playoff Committee thinks about BYU.
Exactly.
I think BYU would need something else to shake up next week, like before the
you'd need to
weekend.
Cincinnati loss.
A couple of those teams to fall out first.
Now, everybody that knows me from many years on the radio circuit knows that this time of year is my favorite time of year for college football, because I always scream the word Armageddon, because that's what it needs to take for teams like a BYU or Boise State or Cincinnati or someone like that to have those teams in front of you all lose and possibly lose bad in order for them to get to jump to the ranking that we have. This year, I can actually say, without a shadow of a doubt, that if Ohio State doesn't get the eligibility, then Cincinnati is going to be the 4th team. To me, unless Cincinnati trips over itself 100 times over to the finish line, to me that's the right call for them to make. Now, Alabama, Cincinnati in the first round. Okay, stranger things have happened in college football. We've seen it. But, Jim said it best. The Cinderella story comes out. Everybody will jump on the Cincinnati bandwagon so they can take down big, bad Alabama and Nick Saban. You get a possible – that the problem also that I see with this ranking, though, is you may actually get a rubber match between Notre Dame and Clemson at 2 versus 3. Now, if Notre Dame were to lose, Now, here's a scenario, Jim, that I know you bleed to the colors of the blue and gold for Notre Dame, but there's a doomsday scenario that I have to point out here. If Ohio State holds its eligibility, if Notre Dame loses to Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, and the CFP committee sees that, they possibly, I'm not saying they will, but possibly start to, in the back of their mind, dismiss that win in the regular season because Trevor Lawrence didn't play. And if Cincinnati finishes the year undefeated in the AAC, there is the crazy possibility. It's crazy. We've seen it happen. The College Football Committee has done nutty things in prior years, especially when it comes like to the big programs. But could possibly Notre Dame, now, and you know me, I believe in Fighting Irish just as much as you do, a lot longer. But could it be possible that Notre Dame gets left out of the national championship of the college football playoff, and Cincinnati sneaks in at number 4?
I don't think so, Tim.
I think the only way that realistically happens is if Florida wins a close SEC title game over Alabama and Clemson beats Notre Dame by like 2 touchdowns and Ohio State stays eligible. I truly don't think that there's a scenario, again, barring a blowout in the ACC title game, that sees an undefeated Cincinnati get in over Notre Dame. And it is based on resume. I'm going to play this card. It's also based on money. Like, Cincinnati is so much more less valuable to the college football playoff, especially in this year when ratings are down, viewers are down, and things like, just money in college football and in all sports across the board are down. Notre Dame in the college football playoff is infinitely more valuable than Cincinnati. So I don't think, again, barring a blowout, I don't think there's a realistic scenario that an undefeated Cincinnati gets in over Notre Dame. Like I said, if Notre Dame loses, but you see Florida beat Alabama, Ohio State remain its eligibility, win the Big Ten title game, and do all of those things convincingly, then there's going to be an interesting conversation. I still personally think, as long as it's within a couple of touchdowns, I think Notre Dame's in either way. I truly do. But, I mean, I'm all for chaos as long as Notre Dame isn't part of the chaos, especially this year.
To worry about. I think that value you're talking about in a season like this, especially Notre Dame, because like even if you're thinking about it and you have Notre Dame at your 4, and you're like, do we slide Florida? Or I mean, Florida can have the resume they want. I think it's going to take a lot for one of those teams. Like you said, I mean, it would have to be a landslide, and even in that scenario, it would have to be a lot on the other side. Because Notre Dame being in discussion, like you said, is great for college football. Because either you're right and Notre Dame wins and gets to the title game and you look like a genius, or you're wrong. And whether Notre Dame succeeds or Notre Dame fails,
it's good for college football.
Discussion, and because those are all the people that watch Notre Dame either want to see them win or want to see them lose. There's nobody watching them just to catch the game.
Yeah,
I'm just playing the devil's advocate.
Oh,
sure, absolutely.
I knew that, but yeah, I just don't see. I'm with Jim. I don't see a lot of scenarios.
I know.
Definitely not with Cincinnati.
I'm just saying we have seen crazier things happen in college football, and I know those presidents on the college football committee, they usually look at things with a fine-tooth comb. And the only thing that's always going to be in the back of my mind is this. Notre Dame beat Clemson. Yes, we understand that 100%. It was a great game. They did it without Trevor Lawrence on the field. A friend of mine who's a big Notre Dame fan as well said, Notre Dame, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You're damned if you do because you beat Clemson without Trevor Lawrence. You're damned if you don't if you lose to Clemson without Trevor Lawrence. That would be considered, a bad loss in some minds of college football pundits. Now we're in the situation that we're going to see Notre Dame play Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, barring something catastrophic that happens in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I'm just worried, and I really and truly am about this, that with Trevor Lawrence, what happens? What happens if it's a 21, 24, 27-point victory for
I think you just show up and play your game and, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
I think if both teams play their best, I don't see that kind of landslide.
Trust me, I'm with you guys. I'm just worried that if it's a 3-touchdown or more
game,
game,
and if it's a 3-touchdown game, Notre Dame doesn't deserve to be in the playoff. I'll say that. Because, you know, once again, it's – yeah, and Dana here in the comments says they want Indy in the money in the playoff as well. But, like, I think the thing is if they don't show up, then that's the typical Notre Dame storyline. But if you look over the course of this schedule, now again, it's not murderer's row, it isn't. But Notre Dame did what they were supposed to do and more in every game except for that Louisville game that ended up 12-7. They had that one scare. Everything else was a dominating win. I don't think you can look at Notre Dame's schedule and comparatively speaking to Alabama, to Clemson, to anybody else in the country, and look over them and say this schedule isn't good enough. I mean, again, if you get blown out, that's a different story.
I'm with you, especially in a shortened season.
In a shortened season,
especially not against the Cincinnati.
Yeah,
who struggled to beat a UCF, and you blew out a Memphis who wound up to be overrated at the beginning of the year, and you blew out a Houston team that usually scores a lot of points. But I mean, it's not like there's anyone in that AAC that. You know, people, you know, we mentioned it with BYU, like, who did you play? You know, I would kind of, if that fine-tooth comb you were talking about, if Cincinnati's the team in question. If it were Florida, you know, like James said, that's a little bit different. But with Cincinnati, that fine-tooth comb, you start picking through that schedule, and you're like, wow, these teams really weren't that good.
Well, here's something that may happen as well, and this will be I know you guys are going to be busy doing the rest of your show and stuff like that, but think about this. What happens if Florida beats Alabama?
That's the scenario we think would make it more interesting.
Yeah, and that's where I go. How big did Florida beat Alabama? How big did Clemson beat Notre Dame? You know, how convincingly did Ohio State win their games against Michigan State, Michigan, and the problem I think for Ohio State too is the fact that Wisconsin is ineligible. So you're going to beat a Wisconsin team that just lost to Michigan, or a Northwestern team that just lost to Michigan State, or you're going to beat an Iowa team that is not even what Iowa football has traditionally been. So I really do think that as long as it's even within 2 touchdowns, I think Notre Dame's safe. If you get to 3-4 touchdowns, and all other pieces fall against Notre Dame, then it becomes a little bit harder. But I don't necessarily.
And ironically, no one in this conversation has brought up the similar scenario happening to Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to start a whole nother discussion, but, you know, if we're bringing up hypotheticals, you know, say Florida comes out and that kid makes a name for himself in the Heisman race and Alabama comes out flat. Doesn't happen often, but it can happen to anybody any day. Florida jumps out to lead, wins that game by 3 or 4 touchdowns. And Notre Dame loses in a close one.
Because Alabama.
Does Alabama fall out to a team? Because I don't think they do. I don't think anybody, even with a big loss to Florida, doesn't put Alabama in. And I think that's kind of one of those, like I said, those Mount Rushmore teams. And I feel like in a season like this, Notre Dame is like just under those Mount Rushmore teams of like, we got to find a way to get these guys in. So either way, I don't see it changing a lot short of COVID on Ohio State.
Yeah.
I think as long as they play in a title game and don't lose, I think you're already looking, in my opinion, at the college playoff. I don't see a lot shaking up. I think that's the bottom line. We've all kind of crossed it.
Ohio State's B team can probably beat some Big Ten A teams any day.
Can't beat COVID.
And I wouldn't be surprised. I know, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ryan Day sends a skeleton squad just to make them make them eligible. And that skeleton squad still has some 4- and 5-star players that haven't seen the field yet, and will probably knock the living hell out of whoever they have to play in order to get.
Sure. That's assuming that the team on the opposite side is eligible as well. Jake here says Cincinnati needs everything to go right for them to get in. He feels they're not a college football playoff caliber team. Huddle Up Podcast is sponsored by Arena Eats. Log on to the website arenaeats.app, that's arenaeats.app, for the ultimate fan experience. At your favorite sports venue, Arena Eats mobile app, pre-order, express pickup, and in-seat delivery. How do you place your order?